Commander Eleanor Winslow felt the familiar hum of the airplane cabin as it descended into Heathrow Airport. After 14 grueling months deployed with the Royal Military Police in the Middle East, she was finally home. At 34 years old, with 12 years of distinguished service, two Queen's commendations for bravery, and scars both visible and hidden, Eleonora carried the weight of her duty like armor. Her dark eyes scanned the crowded terminal as the plane taxied to the gate. This was no ordinary return. Eleonora's thoughts drifted back to her parents, working-class Londoners, who had sacrificed so much to see her succeed. Her father James, a Vietnam War veteran in spirit if not by name, had drilled into her the unyielding lessons of resilience and intelligence. Her mother Evelyn had sewn a patchwork of hope and expectation into every bedtime story. This was the city where they had raised her, a city that had always promised opportunity, but had delivered far too many challenges for someone who looked like her. She tugged her hoodie over her head, shielding her military haircut from the curious eyes of strangers. Her plain civilian clothes, a pair of worn jeans, and a navy blue hoodie felt oddly foreign after a year of rigid uniforms and combat boots. But tonight, Eleonora was determined to reclaim her piece of Chelsea, the neighborhood she had called home for 6 years before deployment. The sleek townhouses, manicured gardens, and quiet streets were meant to soothe her transition from war zone to civilian life. Yet as she laced up her running shoes later that evening and stepped onto the pavement, the familiar rhythm of jogging was the only balm she could find. The steady pounding of her feet against the concrete calmed the storm of emotions, a mix of relief, fatigue, and an unspoken tension she refused to acknowledge. Chelsea's leafy avenues had once been her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the memories of conflict and loss. Tonight, however, the air felt different, thicker, charged with a subtle hostility she wasn't prepared for. Her stride was steady when suddenly the sharp roar of tires screeched beside her. A police cruiser slid to a halt, lights flashing harshly in the twilight. Eleanor's heart tightened. Two white officers emerged, hands hovering near their weapons, eyes locked on her as if she were an intruder. "Hold it right there," barked the taller one, Sergeant Brian Whitaker, his voice cold and commanding. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Eleonora slowed to a stop, masking her growing unease with calm precision. "I live here, officer," she said evenly, gesturing toward the nearby homes. "My house is just 3 doors down. Is there a problem?" The second officer, Constable Simon Clark, circled her like a predator assessing its prey. His smirk was a blade disguised as arrogance. "Convenient," Whitaker sneered. "You know how many times we hear that from people who don't belong here?" Eleonora straightened her back, the soldier within her taking control. "My name is Commander Eleanora Winslow. I've just returned from active deployment. I own my home at 17 Pembroke Crescent. You can verify that easily." Clark stepped closer, invading her space. "Listen, love, we don't care what story you've cooked up. We know your kind doesn't live here unless you're cleaning the houses." The words hit her like a punch, but her face remained calm. Inside, the rage and humiliation warred fiercely. She fought to hold her composure, to maintain the dignity she had earned on far harsher battlefields. "Officer, I'm a resident and a commanding officer in the Royal Military Police. I expect professional courtesy while you sort this out." Whitaker's face twisted in fury. Without warning, his open palm slapped her cheek with brutal force. The echo cracked through the evening silence like a gunshot. "That's for talking back," he spat before both officers grabbed her, roughly forcing her to the pavement she'd been running on moments ago. Clark's knee dug into her back, pinning her down, while Whitaker wrestled her arms behind her. "You people need to learn your place," Clark hissed in her ear, breath hot and sour. "This isn't your neighborhood." Then through the chaos, a voice cut sharply. "Officers, what are you doing? I'm recording this." Dr. Marcus Lynn, Eleonora's neighbor and a cardiologist in his 40s, stood nearby with his phone raised, filming every second. His calm presence broke the spell. The officers hesitated, then reluctantly released her. Whitaker gave a final warning to carry ID next time, and Clark sneered, "Remember to stay in your place." Eleonora stood silently, the sting of the slap still burning, but her resolve now fierce. This was no random act. It was a calculated insult, an attack on her dignity, her identity, and her rightful place in her own community. Back in her pristine Chelsea flat, Eleonora caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. A faint cut traced her cheekbone, a dark red handprint smeared against her skin. The physical pain was fleeting compared to the deeper wound a wound to her honor, to her very being. With trembling fingers, she dialed Zoe Mahmood, her longtime friend, and a tenacious barrister known for taking on impossible cases. Eleonora, welcome home. How was the flight? Zoe's cheerful voice was a jarring contrast to Eleonora's turmoil. Zoe, something happened. She said, her voice steady but tight as she recounted every brutal detail, every cold word. There was silence on the line before Zoe responded with righteous outrage. This is assault. It's a civil rights violation. Abuse of power. You need to file a complaint immediately. These officers can't get away with this. Eleonora paced, eyes drawn to the medals and ribbons hanging on her wall, the symbols of service, sacrifice, and discipline. I know, I need time to process. Later, she remembered her father's words from her childhood lessons forged in the fires of his own battles. Fight smart, not just hard. Use your mind. Use the system. Use their own rules against them. Those words echoed louder now, sparking a determination that would not be quelled. That evening, despite the lingering pain, Eleonora meticulously prepared her uniform, pressing each crease, polishing each medal, reaffirming her identity, not just as a victim, but as a soldier ready to fight again, this time on different ground. Morning light spilled through the curtains as Eleonora sipped cold coffee, her laptop open to public records on Sergeant Whitaker and Constable Clark. Military intelligence training sharpened her scrutiny, patterns emerged. Multiple complaints from minority residents dismissed without investigation, a string of incidents echoing her own experience. Her mind flicked to South London, where her father James had faced similar prejudice decades earlier, teaching her the importance of fighting smarter. She visited her elderly parents bearing gifts and carefully curated stories that omitted the ugly truth. But James's keen eyes saw through her facade. Something happened, he stated softly. Eleonora nodded, telling him the truth in restrained tones. James's gaze hardened with understanding. Now you decide whether to let it go or make something of it. She didn't need to be asked twice. Back home, Dr. Lynn shared troubling news. Other black homeowners were experiencing the same harassment. Regina Atwood, a neurosurgeon. Michael Ajayi, a retired judge whose son had been handcuffed for riding his bike. The pattern was no accident. It was a system. Legal documents from Zoe confirmed the suspicions. Civil suits filed, mysteriously dismissed evidence, lost or ignored. Captain Richard Wickham, the precinct's new commanding officer, was implicated throughout. Eleonora stood before her wall of medals, feeling the weight of her oath, not just to her country, but to justice. The battle ahead was not only personal, but systemic. She wasn't just filing a complaint. She was preparing to confront a corrupt system head-on, armed with the precision of a soldier and the fire of someone who knew what was at stake. The morning sun had barely risen when Commander Eleanora Winslow sat in her modest but tastefully appointed home office, her mind racing yet sharply focused. The room was awash in the soft glow of a single desk lamp and the faint hum of her laptop. Before her lay a growing mountain of files, screenshots, and legal documents, each one a thread weaving into a vast, ugly tapestry of injustice. Since her return from deployment, Eleonora had been consumed not by the familiar battlefield overseas, but by a new insidious conflict closer to home. The brutal slap across her face, the degrading words from two police officers who were meant to protect her, had ignited a fire. But more than personal vindication, this was a battle for every family, every neighbor, every person who had been silenced or ignored by a system built to discriminate. She leaned back, allowing her dark eyes to sweep the collection of testimonies Zoe Mahmood had delivered just yesterday. Each page bore a story like her own: harassment, racial profiling, and abuse of authority perpetrated by the same officers, Sergeant Brian Whitaker and Constable Simon Clark. Their names had become synonymous with unchecked power. The first story was Regina Atwood's, a neurosurgeon with an Ivy League education and a steady hand that had saved countless lives. Regina's professional prestige was no shield against humiliation. The third time they stopped me, Regina had said, her voice steady but with a barely concealed hurt. Officer Whitaker asked if I had stolen the car I was driving. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in hospital scrubs with my ID badge visible. Regina's story struck a nerve. If a woman of such accomplishment could be reduced to suspicion and insult, what hope did others have? Next was Michael Ajayi, a retired judge with silver hair and a calm, authoritative presence. His story was more personal. My son was handcuffed for riding his bike through our neighborhood, Michael recounted. When I identified myself as a judge, they seemed to consider it but didn't apologize. They claimed my son matched a robbery suspect's description, even though he was in his private school uniform with a backpack showing the school logo. Eleonora's heart clenched. This wasn't just isolated, it was systemic. The officers were wielding their badges like weapons against those who didn't belong, enforcing invisible rules based on skin color and class. Over the past few weeks, Eleonora had been digging deep into the Metropolitan Police Department's chain of command, guided by the strategic principles instilled by years in military intelligence. It was never enough to expose the perpetrators. One must dismantle the architecture that allowed such abuse to thrive. At the center of this tangled web was Inspector Richard Wickham, newly appointed commander of the precinct overseeing Chelsea and neighboring affluent districts. Wickham was known for his tough-on-crime stance, an approach that on the surface resonated with public safety, but masked a darker agenda. A series of leaked internal emails Zoe had uncovered showed Wickham directing officers to engage in proactive policing, a euphemism for targeting minority residents with excessive stops and citations. These enforcement quotas were tied directly to performance bonuses, creating a perverse incentive to prey on vulnerable populations. As Eleonora reviewed the documents, a cold knot of anger formed in her stomach. The officers weren't just bad apples. They were players in a system designed to generate revenue at the expense of justice. She rubbed her temples, thinking back to the late-night conversations with her commanding officer, Colonel Henry Bradford. The colonel was a 30-year veteran of the British Army and had mentored her throughout her career. "You have the full support of this command," Eleonora Bradford had said firmly. "Whatever you need, you are not alone." That endorsement was more than just words, it was a lifeline. It gave her the institutional backing she would need to confront a police department built on secrecy and resistance. But Eleonora knew the road ahead would be dangerous. Challenging a system so entrenched was never easy. Retaliation was almost certain, and it could come from unexpected places. Yet her training and experience had prepared her for this kind of battle, one that required patience, planning, and unwavering resolve. By midday, Zoe arrived carrying a bulging portfolio of evidence, sworn affidavits, internal memos, financial reports. She spread them across the dining table, turning the room into an impromptu war room. "These lawsuits have been filed and dismissed under suspicious circumstances," Zoe explained, her voice low but intense. "There's a pattern of evidence disappearing during discovery, witnesses intimidated or ignored." Eleonora studied the documents, noting the consistent involvement of Inspector Wickham and Assistant Chief Robert Alden, who oversaw internal affairs. Both men were implicated in protecting the officers and suppressing complaints. As the hours passed, Dr. Marcus Lynn joined them, bringing news from the neighborhood. His clinic had become an informal gathering place for victims and witnesses. "More people are coming forward," Marcus said. "The community is tired of being targeted. It's not just you, Eleonora." Among the growing group was Officer Diana Ruiz, a Metropolitan Police constable who had witnessed similar abuses and filed reports that vanished without a trace. Her decision to step forward was risky, but it added an insider's credibility to the growing case. "You can't fight this alone," Eleonora told her. "We need allies inside and outside the force." Ruiz nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm in, but we have to be careful. They're watching." That night, Eleonora returned to her bedroom, staring at the polished medals in her wardrobe. Each symbolized sacrifice, discipline, and a promise to uphold the law fairly. The contrast between the honor of her uniform and the hatred she'd encountered stung bitterly. Yet beneath the sting was something else: hope. The hope born of collective strength. She began to formulate a plan, one that combined legal strategy, public exposure, and political pressure. The goal was not just to punish those responsible, but to dismantle the corrupt system enabling them. It would be a long, difficult fight, but Eleonora Winslow was no stranger to battles that seemed impossible. Her father's words echoed through her mind once more. "Fight smart, Ellie. Fight for something bigger than yourself." And now she would. The morning air was thick with humidity as Commander Eleonora Winslow prepared herself meticulously for a confrontation unlike any she had faced before. This was no routine complaint or whispered grievance behind closed doors. This was a battle for justice and dignity, one she intended to fight openly, armed with her truth and the authority her uniform symbolized. In her Chelsea flat, Eleonora stood before the mirror, adjusting the sharp lines of her full-dress uniform. The deep navy fabric bore rows of ribbons and medals that glinted faintly in the morning light, filtering through the curtains. The golden oak leaves of her rank insignia gleamed with a quiet command. Each decoration was a testament to years of discipline, sacrifice, and leadership in the Royal Military Police values she refused to let be trampled in the streets she called home. She rehearsed the words in her mind, steady, firm, unyielding. I am Commander Eleanor Winslow. I am here to address an incident involving officers of the Metropolitan Police Department. This was more than personal vindication. It was a declaration that no badge granted immunity from accountability. No uniform excused prejudice. She was determined to make that clear. With her phone tucked securely away, Eleonora stepped out into the humid London morning, her polished shoes clicking decisively on the pavement. The short walk to the Metropolitan Police headquarters was measured and deliberate. Passers-by noticed the imposing figure in uniform, but none dared approach. The message was unmistakable. She was here on official business, and she was not to be ignored. Inside the gleaming glass and steel lobby, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faltered as heads turned. Uniformed officers, civilian staff, and visitors all registered the presence of a high-ranking military officer in full ceremonial dress. The young desk sergeant snapped to attention. "Good morning, ma'am. How may I assist you?" His tone was respectful but tinged with curiosity. "I need to speak with Sergeant Brian Whitaker and Constable Simon Clark," Eleonora stated evenly, her voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of command. The sergeant hesitated, typing rapidly. "They're currently on patrol, ma'am. Is there something urgent?" Before Eleonora could respond, a tall man with captain's bars approached, his sharp eyes assessing her uniform. His handshake was firm, practiced. "I'm Captain Richard Wickham," he introduced himself smoothly. "How can we assist a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces today?" Eleonora accepted the handshake with equal firmness. "Commander Eleonora Winslow, Royal Military Police. I'm here regarding an incident involving two of your officers." Wickham's polite facade didn't mask the flicker of recognition in his eyes. The tension was palpable. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office," he suggested, gesturing toward a hallway. Eleonora shook her head. "I prefer to wait for Officers Whitaker and Clark. This matter concerns them directly." Wickham's smile tightened, the professional veneer cracking. "They'll be on patrol for several hours. As their commanding officer, I suggest any concerns be addressed through me." The defiance in Eleonora's tone brooked no argument. "I will wait. This is a personal matter requiring their presence." Selecting a chair in the lobby with a clear view of the entrance, Eleonora settled in every inch the composed officer. Minutes stretched into a tense silence as other officers began to gather, drawn by the unusual scene. Then the front doors swung open and Whitaker and Clark entered, laughing about something trivial until they saw her. Their faces shifted dramatically, confusion, recognition, and then unmistakable alarm. Officers Wickham called sharply, "This is Commander Winslow. She wishes to speak with you." Clark was first to recover, adopting a defensive posture. "Ma'am, if this is about the other night we were responding to a call." "A call that doesn't exist in any dispatch record," Eleonora interrupted calmly. Whitaker stepped forward, his face flushing. "We don't need to justify our actions to you. If you have a complaint, file it through proper channels." Eleonora reached into her pocket and produced her phone. "I have something I'd like everyone to see first." She played the video Dr. Marcus Lynn had recorded during the incident, the officer's unwarranted aggression, the racial slurs, the slap, and the excessive force used to restrain her as she offered no resistance. The volume was turned high enough that the gathered officers and staff heard every word, every slur, every unjustified act. A heavy silence fell over the lobby. Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whitaker's face drained of color, while Clark looked anxiously toward Wickham for direction. "This is an internal matter," Wickham declared, stepping between Eleonora and the crowd. "Everyone return to your duties immediately." Few moved. The shocking content of the video held them in place. "This incident is part of a pattern," Eleonora continued, her voice steady and resolute. "Regina Atwood, Michael Ajayi, David Williams, Sophia Rodriguez, all respected professionals in affluent neighborhoods, subjected to similar treatment by these officers." Wickham's professional demeanor slipped further. "That's enough, Commander," he snapped. "You're making unfounded accusations in a police facility. I must ask you to leave." "These aren't unfounded accusations," Eleonora said, standing tall. "I'm supported by sworn statements and documented evidence." A new voice cut through the tension. A younger female officer stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm Officer Diana Ruiz," she said, eyes flicking between Wickham and Eleonora. "I've witnessed similar incidents and reported them through proper channels. Those reports disappeared." Wickham's fury was barely contained. "Officer Ruiz, report to my office immediately." "No, sir," she replied firmly. "I swore an oath to uphold the law and protect the public. That oath doesn't include covering up civil rights violations. The confrontation had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the building. At that moment, the elevator doors opened and a sharply dressed man emerged, his authoritative presence commanding silence. Chief Superintendent Robert Alden Wickham acknowledged with evident relief, "We have a situation that's being handled." The chief's eyes settled on Eleanor with obvious displeasure. "Who are you and why are you creating a disturbance in my department?" Alden demanded. Eleanor stepped forward, standing at her full height. "Commander Eleanor Winslow, Royal Military Police," she declared, presenting her military ID and the paused video of Whitaker's hand connecting with her face. "I am here because your officers assaulted me without cause, used racial slurs, applied excessive force, and violated my civil rights. This is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of discriminatory policing sanctioned at the highest levels of your department." The chief's expression darkened. "That's a serious accusation, Commander," he said coldly. "I don't make it lightly," Eleanor responded. "I am formally requesting an independent investigation into these officers' conduct and the broader policies that enable such behavior." A flicker of communication passed silently between Alden and Wickham. "We take all complaints seriously," Alden stated, his tone clearly implying otherwise. "You can file your complaint with Internal Affairs," Eleanor said evenly. "I've already done that. I'm also filing with the Home Office, the Civil Rights Division, and my Member of Parliament. As a military officer, I have sworn to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." She continued, her voice resolute. "That oath doesn't expire when I wear civilian clothes." Her directness created ripples among the officers assembled. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded silently in support. "I defend this country, so justice applies to everyone, everyone." The sting of the slap that had marked her cheek was now matched by the power of her voice. The echo of Commander Eleanor Winslow's confrontation at Metropolitan Police Headquarters reverberated long after she had left the building. That day marked not just a personal stand against injustice, but the moment when the carefully constructed walls of silence and denial began to crack. The video she played raw, unfiltered footage of two officers assaulting a decorated military commander on the streets of Chelsea had shattered the illusion that the Metropolitan Police Department was a bastion of integrity. Within hours, whispers spread through precincts and offices alike. Some officers averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the undeniable truth. Others spoke in hushed tones, fearful of the repercussions. And a few, those who knew the department's darker side, began to calculate the cost of Eleanor's boldness. Inside the department's command offices, Captain Richard Wickham paced with growing agitation. The video was more damaging than even he had anticipated. The brass at headquarters had sent mixed signals, public statements promising thorough investigations, while quietly closing ranks to protect their own. But what unsettled Wickham most was the quiet rebellion simmering beneath the surface. Officer Diana Ruiz, whose courageous step forward during the confrontation had shocked many, was becoming a beacon for those disillusioned by the toxic culture. She confided in Eleanor that reports she had filed exposing similar abuses had been systematically suppressed, reinforcing the perception of a deeply entrenched cover-up. Eleanor's phone rang late one evening. It was Diana, her voice low but urgent. "There's something you need to know," Diana said. "Captain Wickham has called a meeting of his trusted officers. They've been ordered to make an example of anyone who supports your accusations. They're calling it community maintenance, but it's targeted harassment. They want to intimidate us into silence." The phrase sent a chill through Eleanor. The scale of resistance was greater than she'd imagined. This was not merely about one incident, it was a coordinated effort to maintain power through fear. In the days that followed, Eleanor's quiet London neighborhood felt charged with tension. An unmarked police cruiser was parked conspicuously across from her home for hours on end. Surveillance cameras and shadows seemed to lurk behind every tree and lamppost. Then came the threats, anonymous calls in the dead of night, heavy breathing, chilling silences before the line went dead. Eleanor documented each call meticulously, knowing that evidence would be crucial if the intimidation escalated. Her email inbox flooded with venomous messages from untraceable accounts, racial slurs, warnings to back off, and threats aimed not just at her, but at her family. One particularly disturbing email included a photo of her parents' bakery, a small but beloved business in a South London neighborhood they had served for over 20 years. Despite the growing pressure, Eleanor refused to yield. Her military experience had prepared her for this kind of psychological warfare, the constant unseen enemy trying to break resolve. But the retaliation was escalating. One morning, Eleonora stepped outside to collect the post and discovered her car vandalized. The words "Go home" were spray painted in jagged red letters along the driver's side door. The raw aggression struck a momentary crack in her professional detachment, a flicker of rage quickly channeled into cold determination. She photographed the damage carefully before calling her insurance company. Zoe arrived soon after witnessing the evidence of hate and harassment firsthand. Later that afternoon, Regina Atwood called, voice strained with exhaustion. She'd been pulled over and detained for 90 minutes by officers from the same precinct, accused of driving a vehicle linked to a drug investigation, a baseless claim, as no contraband was found and no charges filed. Regina had missed a critical surgery and a patient suffered complications that might have been prevented. Dr. Marcus Lynn was not spared either. His medical practice suddenly came under investigation for billing irregularities by a task force with apparent ties to the police department. The timing was no coincidence. Worse yet, Eleonora received a chilling call from Colonel Henry Bradford. Her military security clearance had been flagged for review, a move orchestrated by unknown parties intent on discrediting her and jeopardizing her career. This goes deeper than the precinct, Bradford warned. Someone powerful is pulling strings to undermine you before you can damage them. The implications were clear. The system was striking back hard, seeking not only to intimidate Eleonora, but to isolate her by attacking everything she held dear. Her father called with distressing news. City inspectors had descended on their family bakery, citing a barrage of code violations, overnight violations that had never been an issue in 20 years of operation. The threat of closure hung ominously. It was a coordinated campaign of retaliation aimed at eroding her support network. Late that night, as Eleonora sat alone in her dimly lit study, the weight of the battle pressed down with a force heavier than any she had encountered in combat. She wrestled with the consequences her stand had unleashed for Regina, for Marcus, for her parents. They were all collateral damage in a war she had ignited. Her resolve, however, remained unbroken. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door startled her. Peering through the peephole, she saw Officer Diana Ruiz, standing nervously but resolutely. "I shouldn't be here," Diana whispered when Eleonora opened the door. "But you need to know what's happening inside." Over coffee in Eleonora's kitchen, Diana revealed the department's dark underbelly. Captain Wickham had gathered his loyal officers, instructing them to punish anyone seen supporting Eleonora's claims. The department's culture was not just about individual racism, but an organized system designed to generate revenue by targeting minority residents in wealthy areas. "They have unofficial monthly quotas," Diana explained. "Officers who meet or exceed these quotas get performance bonuses. The easiest targets are minorities in affluent neighborhoods. They can pay the fines, but often don't have the connections to fight." Wickham's orders to maintain community standards were a thinly veiled code for racial profiling and selective enforcement. The system was protecting itself because too much money and too many careers were at stake. Before leaving, Diana offered a grim warning. "It's a briefing tomorrow. Wickham wants officers to look for any opportunity to cite or arrest anyone associated with you. They call it community maintenance, but it's harassment." That warning was prophetic. The following night, Eleonora awoke to the sound of shattering glass. Moving swiftly, she retrieved her personal firearm from its secure lockbox and cleared her house room by room. Someone had broken in through the back window. Though nothing appeared stolen from the main living areas, Eleonora's heart sank when she checked her home office. Her military medals, including the 2 Purple Hearts, were gone. The responding officers arrived over an hour later. Their cursory inspection and dismissive attitude made it clear this burglary would receive minimal investigation. One officer muttered with a shrug, "Sometimes people just want shiny things," ignoring the fact that valuable electronics and jewelry had been untouched. The targeted theft of items with personal and professional significance was no accident. It was calculated intimidation aimed at discrediting her. The next morning brought a stark call from Colonel Bradford. "They're trying to access your service records," he said gravely. "Disciplinary actions, psychological evaluations, combat incident reports. They're looking for anything to discredit you." He had placed security flags on her files, but persistence was relentless. "You've stirred a hornet's nest," Commander Bradford said. "They see you as a serious threat." As Eleonora installed new security systems and cameras, she reflected on the battle unfolding, a war fought not with guns and grenades, but with fear and intimidation. "They think fear is their weapon," she murmured. "They've forgotten I've been to war." Her military training told her that the fiercest resistance often came just before a breakthrough. The question echoed in her mind, could a single person truly stand against such a corrupt system, or did real change require a united front? The weeks that followed Commander Eleanor Winslow's daring confrontation with the Metropolitan Police Headquarters were a maelstrom of emotions, strategies, and alliances. The personal humiliation she endured had transcended its origins. It had become a clarion call for justice and systemic change. But Eleanor knew that to confront a behemoth like the Metropolitan Police Department, she would need more than courage and evidence. She would need allies. The first step in building that alliance was to transform individual stories of harassment and discrimination into a united front that could not be ignored or silenced. In the spacious living room of Dr. Marcus Lynn's home, a diverse group of professionals had gathered, each drawn by their own experiences, but united by a shared purpose. Neurosurgeons, judges, military officers, civil rights attorneys, and community leaders filled the room, their conversations weaving together like the threads of a tapestry. Eleanor stood before a large whiteboard where she had meticulously mapped out the department's command structure. Captain Richard Wickham and Chief Superintendent Robert Alden loomed at the center, surrounded by layers of subordinates and enablers. "We're not just facing a few bad officers," Eleanor began, her voice steady and commanding. "We're up against a system, a culture that's protected by those at the highest levels." Regina Atwood, now dressed in a tailored pantsuit instead of hospital scrubs, nodded solemnly. "After I was detained, I started talking to my colleagues. 3 other black doctors at my hospital have been stopped repeatedly in the same neighborhoods where we live. This isn't random." Michael Ajayi, the retired judge, leaned forward, his legal mind piecing together the implications. "What we're seeing has the hallmarks of a revenue generation scheme masquerading as public safety. When I presided over municipal cases, I occasionally saw evidence of quota systems technically illegal but tolerated." Zoe Mahmood, the tenacious barrister, spread stacks of sworn statements and legal documents across the table. "We have 27 affidavits now, all following the same pattern: selective enforcement targeting minorities in affluent areas who can afford fines but are less likely to fight charges. Captain Wickham's name appears consistently, as does Assistant Chief Alden's." The room fell into thoughtful silence, the weight of their collective experience settling in. A sudden knock interrupted the meeting. Dr. Lynn checked his security cameras and raised an eyebrow. "It's Officer Diana Ruiz," he said, opening the door. "She's nervous, but she says she has information that might help." Initially, some in the group were hesitant about including a current officer from the department, wary of infiltration or reprisals. But Eleanor vouched for Diana's integrity, and the officer was welcomed. Diana produced a USB drive filled with internal documents, citation records broken down by neighborhood demographics, emails outlining enforcement priorities, and spreadsheets tracking officers' performance with attached bonus structures. The data was damning. "They track citation rates like sales quotas," Diana explained, pointing to a spreadsheet on the screen. "See the concentration in neighborhoods with higher minority homeownership. Officers who meet or exceed their targets get bonuses. It's all incentivized." The revelation sparked intense discussion about legal strategies. Zoe outlined potential avenues but warned of obstacles. "They'll claim qualified immunity, discretionary enforcement, or lack of explicit racial directives in policy. Our challenge is proving deliberate discriminatory impact, not just coincidental enforcement patterns." As the legal debate continued, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a message from Channel 7 investigative reporter Aisha Hammond. "I've been following your story," the text read. "I want to talk. I've been investigating police misconduct here for 8 months. Your confrontation has accelerated sources coming forward. I think our investigations could help each other." After initial hesitation, Eleanor recognized the value of strategic media exposure. She called Aisha, and they arranged to meet the next day. Meanwhile, political channels began to open. Michael Ajayi had contacts within the government. He reached out to Gloria Davison, the chair of the Parliamentary Public Safety Oversight Committee. "Gloria is looking for concrete evidence of discriminatory policing," Michael explained. "Our documentation could provide the proof needed for legislative reforms." The alliance was expanding rapidly, encompassing legal experts, medical professionals, military officers, media, and politicians. Each brought their unique perspective, resources, and influence. More significantly, Officer Diana Ruiz revealed fractures within the Metropolitan Police Department itself. "Not everyone supports this," she said quietly. "Several officers are disturbed by what's happening. There's quiet talk about the department's direction under Chief Alden. She disclosed that Constable Simon Clark, previously aggressive and hostile, had begun asking questions and expressing discomfort with the retaliatory tactics. This internal division was a chink in the armor of what had seemed an impenetrable fortress. Eleanor received an unexpected message from Colonel Henry Bradford. A police veterans group was reaching out expressing concern over the treatment of a military officer by local police. They're requesting a meeting, the text said. Several are retired officers who don't like what they see. The growing network of allies extended far beyond the initial confrontation. What began as a personal stand was morphing into a broad-based movement demanding systemic reform. Days later, Aisha Hammond forwarded a significant breakthrough, leaked internal police documents detailing explicit directives to focus enforcement in transitional neighborhoods areas with increasing minority homeownership. The documents included performance metrics assigning higher points to citations issued to minorities, maximizing revenue extraction. This leak was a critical breach in the department's information control and suggested the once unified facade was starting to crack. As the meeting drew to a close, Dr. Lin summed up the sentiment in the room. When they targeted us individually, they dismissed our complaints. Together, we are much harder to silence. Eleonora nodded in agreement, feeling the power shift palpably. The battle that began with a slap on a quiet London street was becoming a revolution. Enforcement across the country. It was the meticulously researched investigative report by Channel 7's Aisha Hammond that marked a turning point. The exposé, titled "Policing for Profit, a Hidden Scheme in London," was a masterclass in journalistic integrity and tenacity. Carefully crafted to present a compelling, irrefutable case, it combined harrowing testimonials, leaked internal documents, and stark statistical evidence to reveal the systemic nature of racial profiling and revenue-driven policing. In the brightly lit newsroom, Aisha pored over the final cut of the segment, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the story she was about to unleash. Her months of investigation, fueled by tips from whistleblowers and painstaking analysis of police records, had culminated in this moment. The footage of Whitaker's slap, combined with the damning emails from Captain Wickham, left no room for doubt. As the program aired during prime time, millions tuned in. Social media exploded. Hashtags like "Rasha's Justice for Winslow" and "End Policing for Profit" trended nationwide. The story resonated across political and social lines, sparking heated debates about race power and accountability. Eleonora watched the broadcast from her living room, clad once again in her full-dress uniform, a silent symbol of the authority and credibility she wielded, not by rank alone, but by the righteousness of her cause. Calls flooded her phone. Supporters, activists, veterans, and ordinary citizens all reached out, sharing their own stories of injustice or offering solidarity. But the flood of praise was met with an equally fierce backlash. The Metropolitan Police Department, cornered and embarrassed, held a hastily arranged press conference. Chief Superintendent Robert Alden appeared before cameras, his expression strained. "We take these allegations seriously," he said, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. "An internal investigation is underway." Yet to many it was too little too late. Pressure mounted quickly. Other police departments across the country came under scrutiny as officers stepped forward to share their experiences with racial profiling and quotas. The narrative was no longer confined to London, but was a national epidemic. Eleanor's military background gave her a platform that few others could claim. Her measured professional demeanor and unwavering commitment to constitutional principles made her difficult to dismiss as simply a disgruntled civilian or an activist with an agenda. During a televised interview with a respected national news program, Eleonora articulated the core of her mission. "My service taught me that leadership requires accountability. When I discovered this was not isolated but systemic, I felt compelled to act openly. The Constitution I swore to defend applies to every citizen equally, regardless of race or address." Her words struck a chord with viewers across the spectrum, galvanizing public opinion and broadening the coalition of reform advocates. Behind the scenes, Zoe Mahmood worked tirelessly with legal teams preparing lawsuits and coordinating with civil rights organizations. The pressure forced the Metropolitan Police Department to confront an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy. Financial records obtained through Zoe's contacts revealed the extent of revenue-driven policing. Over the past 3 years, over $10 million in fines collected in neighborhoods with growing minority populations. Bonuses awarded to officers based on citation quotas created perverse incentives that corrupted enforcement priorities. Meanwhile, Officer Simon Clark, once complicit and aggressive, reached out to Eleonora through Diana Ruiz. I joined to protect and serve Clark, admitted during a tense private meeting. What we've been doing isn't that. After seeing the retaliation against you, I can't be part of it anymore. Clark's decision to break ranks threatened to unravel the department's fragile unity. Captain Wickham and Whitaker viewed his cooperation as betrayal, issuing veiled threats that only hardened Clark's resolve. With Clark's testimony and the growing body of evidence, the state attorney general announced a special investigation into the Metropolitan Police's practices. This investigation will be thorough and independent, the attorney general declared in a press release. We will determine if these practices violate state and federal law. The announcement marked a watershed moment, elevating the issue from local controversy to a matter of national legal significance. Political leaders initially cautious found themselves compelled to respond. The Home Secretary, after intense public pressure, promised full cooperation with the investigation and called for urgent reforms. Meanwhile, Eleonora maintained a disciplined approach to media engagement. On the advice of Zoe, she limited her public statements to facts and the broader context, avoiding personal attacks. This isn't about undermining law enforcement, she explained during a community forum. It's about ensuring policing honors constitutional rights and serves all citizens equally. That is not radical, it's fundamental. Her message resonated with moderate voters and reform advocates alike, creating a broad coalition that transcended traditional divides. 8 days after the expose, Eleonora watched live footage of peaceful protests outside police headquarters. Protesters held signs bearing her image and quotes from her interview, their voices united in calls for justice and accountability. What had begun as a moment of personal humiliation had transformed into a movement for systemic change. Eleonora reflected on the long road ahead. Institutional resistance remained strong, and meaningful reform would require sustained vigilance. But the exposure phase of their strategy had succeeded beyond expectations. The truth was no longer hidden in shadows, it was illuminated for all to see. The corrupt system now stood naked before public judgment, its defenders increasingly isolated as evidence mounted. And the movement was only gaining momentum. The tide of public outrage and mounting evidence crashed relentlessly against the walls of the Metropolitan Police Department, shaking its foundations to their core. The once impregnable fortress of denial, secrecy, and unchecked power was beginning to crumble under the weight of truth and accountability. At the center of the storm was Chief Superintendent Robert Alden, who now found himself under unprecedented scrutiny. News crews swarmed the department's headquarters as investigators from the Attorney General's office arrived armed with subpoenas and a determination to uncover every detail of the corrupt system that had flourished under his watch. Eleonora Winslow stood outside the building, her uniform impeccable, her gaze steady and unyielding. The medals on her chest gleamed in the morning sun, not as mere decorations, but as symbols of justice, resilience, and a promise kept. Inside, forensic accountants and digital forensics experts meticulously combed through financial records, emails, and internal communications. Their findings were damning. A sophisticated scheme had been in place for years, using selective enforcement to generate substantial revenue, while creating a facade of crime reduction in affluent neighborhoods. Citations issued to minority residents were fast-tracked through an accelerated processing system that left little room for legal challenges. Meanwhile, similar infractions by white residents often resulted in warnings or no formal charges. More disturbing was the discovery that Captain Richard Wickham had attempted to delete incriminating emails and enforcement directives from department servers. The attempt was thwarted by vigilant officers, including Diana Ruiz, whose cooperation with investigators had become invaluable. When confronted, Wickham claimed he was merely organizing files. Digital forensic experts recovered the deleted materials, adding obstruction of justice to the growing list of potential charges against him. Meanwhile, Officer Brian Whitaker faced the most immediate consequences. The video of his unprovoked assault on Eleonora provided incontrovertible evidence of excessive force and civil rights violations. The district attorney, responding to public pressure, filed felony assault charges against him, charges carrying significant prison time. Whitaker's attorney sought a plea deal offering testimony against higher-ranking officers. But prosecutors, mindful of the political climate and public sentiment, were unwilling to grant substantial concessions. As the investigation unfolded, more officers came forward revealing a toxic culture under Alden's leadership. They described a promotion system rewarding aggressive enforcement in minority communities while disciplining those who failed to meet citation quotas. Eleanor's own testimony before the city council was a defining moment. Dressed in her full military uniform, she addressed the assembled officials with measured passion. I have served alongside brave men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice to protect our constitutional rights, she declared. Those rights do not expire when we return home. When law enforcement violates them, it betrays not only the citizens it serves, but the principles that make our nation worth defending. Her words echoed beyond the council chambers, capturing the attention of citizens and media alike. The police union initially responded with statements condemning what they called a rush to judgment in political witch hunts. But as evidence mounted, their position softened, emphasizing support for good officers and systemic reforms rather than blanket defense. Community meetings organized by Dr. Marcus Lynn and Regina Atwood drew hundreds who came forward to share stories of discriminatory policing that had long been ignored. Data revealed Black residents in affluent neighborhoods were 8 times more likely to receive citations than their white neighbors for identical infractions, and those citations carried fines on average 40% higher. Officer Simon Clark's sworn deposition was pivotal. He described how officers were trained to use minor infractions as pretext for stops in certain neighborhoods, coded language for racial profiling. The training wasn't written down, Clark explained, but everyone understood what was expected. Vehicle equipment violations, suspicious behavior, all were excuses to target those who didn't look like they belonged. Clark's testimony corroborated the statistical evidence and directly implicated departmental leadership in discriminatory practices. Yet amid the public reckoning, Eleanor faced a personal crisis. The military review of her security clearance, triggered by false information from Alden's office, remained unresolved. Colonel Henry Bradford used his influence to prevent immediate adverse action, but the shadow of doubt hung heavily. The fight took a dangerous turn when Wickham, increasingly desperate, confronted Eleanor in the City Hall parking garage after her testimony. "You've destroyed careers and endangered public safety," he accused, blocking her path. "Was getting your face on television worth it? Worth undermining an entire department?" Eleanor's calm response was firm. "This isn't about me. It's about equal protection under the law. It's about constitutional policing." Wickham, enraged, lunged to grab her arm, calling her a self-righteous bitch. But security cameras captured his aggressive behavior. Staff intervened immediately, and the footage became the final blow to Wickham's career. He was arrested for attempted assault and intimidation of a witness. His desperate act sealed his fate, confirming the depth of corruption the investigation had uncovered. With Wickham's arrest, the last organized resistance within the department collapsed. Officers who had remained loyal out of fear now distanced themselves from the disgraced leadership, creating space for reformers to emerge. Sensing the shifting political winds, the city's mayor announced the formation of a civilian oversight committee with real power to review police practices and complaints, a move that surprised many. Eleanor was offered a seat on the newly created Police Reform Task Force, alongside legal experts, civil rights advocates, and reform-minded law enforcement professionals. The appointment recognized her pivotal role in exposing corruption and her expertise in law enforcement standards. As the department transitioned from crisis to reform, the focus shifted from punishment to prevention. Structural changes to incentives, oversight mechanisms, and departmental culture were necessary to break the cycle of abuse. Eleanor's journey from victim to change agent culminated in a complex mix of satisfaction and sobering reality. The system was being held accountable, but the work of creating something better was just beginning. In the months that followed the collapse of the old guard within the Metropolitan Police Department, a profound transformation began to take shape. The era of unchecked authority, discriminatory enforcement, and revenue-driven policing was drawing to a close. What emerged was a vision for a new kind of law enforcement, one grounded in constitutional principles, community trust, and accountability. Commander Eleanor Winslow found herself at the forefront of this change. Her military discipline and unwavering commitment to justice now channeled into the intricate and often frustrating work of institutional reform. Her promotion to lieutenant colonel was more than a recognition of her professional achievements. It was a testament to the pivotal role she played in exposing corruption and leading the push for accountability. Standing proudly in the new ranks insignia, Eleanor reflected on the journey from that fateful evening jog in Chelsea to the steps she now took toward building a better police force. The newly appointed Chief Superintendent, Gabriela Martinez, brought in from outside the department, embodied the break with the past. With a strong background in constitutional policing and community engagement, she symbolized the department's commitment to change. Under Martinez's leadership, the department underwent a comprehensive restructuring. The revenue-based citation quota system was dismantled and replaced with evaluations focused on community engagement, problem-solving, and constitutional adherence. Officers were now judged on their ability to de-escalate conflicts, build trust, and apply laws equitably. The appointment of Officer Diana Ruiz as the department's first Chief Integrity Officer marked another milestone. Empowered to investigate complaints, monitor enforcement patterns, and ensure compliance with constitutional standards, Ruiz's office operated independently from the traditional chain of command. She reported directly to the Civilian Oversight Committee, whose members included community representatives who had experienced the department's previous failures firsthand. This oversight committee wielded real power with authority to review complaints and make policy recommendations. The inclusion of voices like Regina Atwood and Michael Ajayi ensured reforms were informed by lived experience, not just abstract policy. The department's culture began to shift. Training programs were revamped to incorporate lessons from the investigation, including the consequences of systemic misconduct and the importance of moral courage. Officer Simon Clark, who had turned whistleblower, was assigned to the Community Relations Unit. His experience became a vital part of the curriculum, serving as a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope for change from within. Legal consequences followed swiftly. Officer Brian Whitaker was convicted of assault under color of authority and civil rights violations. His sentence of 5 years in prison sent a powerful message that the badge did not grant immunity from the law. Other officers faced lesser charges, many accepting plea deals requiring community service and professional retraining. Chief Superintendent Robert Alden resigned in disgrace after investigations revealed personal enrichment from the citation-driven revenue system. Forensic accountants uncovered offshore accounts linked suspiciously to departmental revenue increases, prompting federal investigations into corruption and tax evasion. The broader impact of the reforms extended beyond policing. Eleonora's parents attended a special ceremony where she received an official commendation from the governor for her courage in challenging systemic injustice. James Winslow, now walking with a cane but standing tall, whispered proudly, "You fought smart just like I taught you." The family bakery, once targeted during the retaliation phase, transformed into a vibrant community hub. Regular coffee with cops events fostered dialogue and rebuilt trust between officers and residents. Dr. Marcus Lynn established a community support program for victims of police misconduct, providing legal resources, counseling, and advocacy training. Funded through a city settlement, the program ensured future misconduct would be met with informed and empowered resistance. Zoe Mahmood spearheaded a new civil rights division within the district attorney's office dedicated to investigating and prosecuting official misconduct. Her legal expertise and personal commitment made her a formidable guardian against the reemergence of discriminatory practices. The reforms inspired legislative action. State and national bodies examined patterns of selective enforcement and revenue-driven policing, considering federal standards for police accountability and prohibiting citation-based performance metrics. At the heart of these changes was a cultural evolution. Officers previously complicit in the old regime found new courage to embody constitutional policing principles. The transformation was not merely policy, but a redefinition of the profession's moral compass. Eleonora often visited the Police Academy auditorium where she addressed new cadets. Her speeches emphasized the solemn responsibility of policing. Your oath is not selective. It applies equally to every citizen. That equality is your legal and moral obligation. The cadets listened intently, their faces reflecting hope and determination. They represented a new generation entering a reformed department shaped by hard lessons and courageous leaders like Eleonora. One afternoon as she left the academy, Eleonora encountered Officer Clark, now engaged in community outreach. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual respect and understanding. Lieutenant Colonel Clark greeted, "The work we're doing is changing lives." Eleonora smiled softly. "It makes the department stronger." Their brief exchange symbolized the personal reckoning that accompanied institutional reform, a recognition that true justice required both systemic change and individual accountability. Eleonora's journey from victim to catalyst had come full circle. The slap that had once stung her cheek now echoed as a clarion call for transformation, an enduring legacy of courage and conviction. The transformation of the Metropolitan Police Department was not simply a matter of policy changes or personnel shifts, it was a profound cultural revolution. At the heart of this change was the recognition that rebuilding trust with the community required consistent, transparent, and empathetic engagement. Commander Eleanor Winslow had become a central figure in this new era, using her military discipline and leadership skills to shape the department's future. She understood that the scars left by years of discriminatory policing could not be healed overnight. It would take sustained effort, openness, and a genuine commitment to equality. One of the first initiatives Eleanor championed was the establishment of Coffee with Cops events throughout the city's diverse neighborhoods. These informal gatherings provided a space where officers and community members could meet as human beings rather than adversaries. Residents shared their concerns and experiences, while officers listened, learning firsthand about the fears and frustrations their enforcement policies had caused. Eleanor often attended these events not just as a guest, but as an active participant. Her presence symbolized the new leadership's willingness to be held accountable and to learn from the community they served. Simultaneously, training programs at the police academy were overhauled. Gone were the days when performance was measured solely by citations and arrests. Instead, recruits were taught the principles of constitutional policing, emphasizing de-escalation, cultural competency, and the importance of moral courage. Eleanor frequently returned to the academy to address cadets. Her speeches were candid, drawing on her experiences both in the military and in the fight against systemic injustice. "Your badge is a symbol of trust," she told them. "That trust is earned by your actions every day. It's not enough to enforce laws, you must enforce justice." She stressed the importance of empathy and understanding, reminding them that behind every stop or citation was a person deserving dignity and respect. The curriculum incorporated case studies from the recent reforms, highlighting both failures and successes. Officers like Simon Clark, whose journey from complicity to reform had been difficult but transformative, became part of the training narrative. Beyond the academy, the department established a community relations unit dedicated to proactive engagement with residents. This unit worked closely with advocacy groups, schools, and local organizations to build bridges and foster mutual respect. Eleanor recognized that change also required addressing the personal reckoning of officers. Many had been complicit in or silent about past abuses out of fear or conformity. Providing avenues for reflection counseling and ethical development was essential. The appointment of Officer Diana Ruiz as Chief Integrity Officer had been pivotal. Reporting directly to the Civilian Oversight Committee, her office ensured ongoing monitoring of enforcement patterns and timely investigations of complaints. Eleanor and Diana collaborated closely, fostering a culture where whistleblowers were protected and encouraged. On the political front, Eleanor testified before parliamentary committees advocating for national standards on police accountability and banning citation-driven performance metrics. Her measured, authoritative voice carried the weight of experience and integrity. The reforms rippled beyond London, inspiring similar efforts across the country. Legislators examined the evidence and proposed bills to codify transparency and fairness into law enforcement practices. Amid these sweeping changes, Eleanor's personal life also evolved. She reconnected with her family, including her father James, who took quiet pride in her accomplishments. During a ceremony honoring her contributions, James whispered, "You fought smart, just like I taught you." Their bond, forged through shared struggle and resilience, was a source of strength for Eleanor as she continued her work. Despite progress, Eleanor remained vigilant. She knew that institutional reform was an ongoing process requiring constant dedication and oversight. The legacy of the past could not be erased overnight, but with each new officer trained in constitutional policing, each community meeting held, and each complaint addressed with seriousness, the future grew brighter. Eleanor's journey from a decorated military commander assaulted in her own neighborhood to a transformative leader shaping the future of law enforcement became a powerful testament to the impact of courage, strategy, and unwavering commitment to justice. Her final message to the new generation of officers echoed through the halls of the academy and beyond. Moral courage, the willingness to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when you stand alone, that is what separates a peace officer from an enforcer of laws. As cadets took their oaths and began their careers under a fundamentally reformed system, Eleanor looked on with hope and resolve, knowing that the battle for justice was far from over, but that true change had finally taken root. The moment Commander Eleanor Winslow stood before Captain Richard Wickham and Chief Superintendent Robert Alden in her full military uniform and simply said, "Remember me, officers," was more than symbolic. It was a declaration that would echo through the corridors of law enforcement for years to come. They certainly remembered her now, as did the entire department, the city, and beyond. The transformation she helped ignite was no fleeting victory, but a seismic shift toward justice, accountability, and constitutional integrity. The reforms she championed laid the foundation for a policing system that was more than just an ideal. It became a lived reality for all citizens, regardless of race, class, or neighborhood. In the months and years that followed, Eleanor's story became a beacon of hope and a blueprint for systemic change. Her journey from victim to change agent was chronicled in media, taught in academies, and cited in legislative chambers. But perhaps most importantly, it inspired a generation of officers and citizens alike to refuse complacency and demand a better system. One day, during a visit to a community center hosting a police outreach program, Eleonora encountered Officer Simon Clark. Now a dedicated member of the Community Relations Unit, Clark's transformation mirrored that of the department itself. Lieutenant Colonel Clark greeted her with a respectful nod. "How's the work going?" she asked, a genuine smile crossing her face. "It's educational," Clark admitted. "I'm learning things I should have understood years ago about how our actions affect people's lives and their trust. That understanding," Eleonora said, "makes you a better officer and the department stronger." Their brief exchange captured the essence of the long, arduous journey from confrontation and conflict to understanding and reform. Eleonora often reflected on how the slap that had once stung her cheek had struck a far deeper blow to a corrupt system. Her military discipline and strategic thinking had transformed personal humiliation into institutional reform, proving that one person's courage could ignite a movement. Yet she also understood that the fight for justice required constant vigilance. Systems evolve and abuses can resurface if left unchecked. The reforms she helped establish included mechanisms for ongoing oversight, community engagement, and transparency safeguards to protect future generations. At the police academy, Eleonora's address to cadets remained a cornerstone of the curriculum. "Your oath is not selective," she reminded them. "It applies equally to every citizen. Guard that trust with your life." Moral courage, the willingness to stand up for what's right, is what separates a peace officer from an enforcer of laws. Her words resonated deeply, preparing new officers for the challenges ahead and instilling a profound respect for constitutional principles. Eleanor's family remained her anchor. Her father, James Winslow, proud and dignified despite the toll of age and hardship, often accompanied her to public events. Their bond, strengthened through shared struggle and resilience, was a testament to the personal cost and reward of standing for justice. The family bakery, once a target during the retaliation, blossomed into a community hub. It became a symbol of renewal and connection, a place where stories were shared, relationships built, and healing began. Dr. Marcus Lynn's community support program flourished, offering legal resources and counseling to victims of police misconduct. Funded through settlements and grants, it ensured that those affected would no longer be left to navigate the system alone. Zoe Mahmood's Civil Rights Division in the District Attorney's Office became a formidable force against official misconduct, carrying forward the torch of accountability. The ripple effects extended beyond local borders. Legislatures nationwide examined similar patterns of discriminatory enforcement, passing laws to prohibit citation-driven policing and establish national standards for accountability. As Eleonora looked to the future, she remained both hopeful and determined. The path to justice was never easy, but through courage, strategy, and collective action, systemic change was possible. Her story reminded everyone that privilege and professional status might not protect against discrimination, but they could be powerful tools to fight it. The legacy she forged was not just about reforming a police department, but about transforming a society to uphold the principles of equality and justice for all.